엄청 크다.
손 크네. 태권도 원! 하! 하!
아직까지는 쉽네. 잠깐만. 너 안 쉬워.
힘드는데?
Held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit. A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values preserved over time have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together. APEC meets Gyeongju.
President Lee on Tuesday ordered the relevant ministries to use all their available resources to ensure the return of South Korean nationals kidnapped in Cambodia after responding to scam job offers, following the torture and death of a South Korean college student in the Southeast Asian country. Unification Minister Chung Dong-young has hinted at the possibility of a North Korea-U.S. summit during the upcoming APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju later this month, citing the inter-Korean truce village Panmunjeom as a potential venue. Samsung Electronics estimated its third quarter operating profit as the highest in more than 3 years, driven by a rebound in memory chip prices and increased sales of high bandwidth memory products. In addition, the country's overall ICT exports came in at a record high for the month of September. We begin with the latest on an investigation into the recent job scams in Cambodia targeting Koreans. While the government is stepping efforts to combat the string of crimes, President Lee called for swift coordination with the local authorities there and tighter travel restrictions. Our Presidential Office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
With growing calls to tackle a recent crime surge in Cambodia targeting Koreans, President Lee Jae-myung began the weekly cabinet meeting by urging the prompt return of kidnapped Koreans who had been caught up in job scams.
국민의 생명과 안전을 지키는 것이 정부의 가장 큰 책임입니다. 지금은 다른 무엇보다 피해자들을 보호하고 또 사건 연루자들을 국내로 신속하게 송환해야 됩니다.
He called for the need to speed up establishing a coordination system with the Cambodian authorities, strengthening travel restrictions for areas of concern, and securing a sufficient budget for consular services.
가용 자원을 총동원해서 신속하게, 정확하게, 확실하게 대응해 주시기 바랍니다.
This follows an increase in reported kidnappings of Koreans by criminal rings in Cambodia through job scams, often related to voice phishing, and the recent torture death of a Korean college student by a local organized crime gang. On the economy, President Lee urged that all hands should be on deck in the face of intensifying global trade conflict, stressing the need for gaining a technological edge and diversifying export markets. He also called for strict measures to straighten out distortions in the domestic real estate market caused by disinformation. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And now, on to day 2 of the National Assembly's very first audit of the Lee Jae-myung administration. The Unification Minister shared his views on issues regarding North Korea, including the possibility of a summit between Pyongyang and Washington. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
On the second day of the parliamentary audit of President Lee's government, Unification Minister Chung Dong-young stated that there is a possibility of a North Korea-U.S. summit on the sidelines of the upcoming APEC leaders' meeting. The remarks were made when responding to a lawmaker's question at a Foreign Affairs Committee meeting, where the minister said he strongly hopes a summit takes place and that if it does happen, it would likely take place in Panmunjeom, Truce Village in Paju City. When it comes to how Seoul will deal with Pyongyang, the minister reaffirmed the End Initiative, exchange, normalization, and denuclearization that was put forward by President Lee during his address at the UN General Assembly last month. Based on this vision, Chung added that Seoul will end hostility and pursue dialogue with the North. When it comes to acknowledging South and North Korea as two separate states, the minister underlined how recognizing the two Koreas as such does not mean accepting permanent division, and rather it is the key to opening the door to unification. He added that the government is to officially confirm the idea soon. Meanwhile, Joint Chiefs of Staff was also grilled by Defense Committee lawmakers, where its chairman, General Jin Young-sing, apologized for the army having participated in former President Yoon Suk-yeol's botched martial law attempt. He mentioned North Korea's recent military parade where the regime showcased its latest Hwasong-20 intercontinental ballistic missile under development and vowed for a firm readiness posture against Pyongyang.
The Joint Chiefs of Staff are doing their utmost to establish a strong and ready military posture that can respond to any threat immediately, while also focusing all efforts on transforming into a smart elite force that can win on future battlefields.
The JCS added that it is seeking to hold a South Korea-U.S. military committee meeting attended by top military officers in Seoul early next month. These usually take place ahead of the Security Consultative Meeting, an annual meeting of the defense chiefs of the two countries. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's Culture Minister Choi Hee-young has emphasized the need for active investment in the culture industry and amid the country's increasing global reach. At the parliamentary inspection for the Culture, Sports and Tourism Committee on Tuesday, Choi stated that despite a slowdown in the gaming and film industry, it is essential to build a firm culture and arts ecosystem to foster Korea's culture industry. He pledged to strengthen the industry as a future growth sector worth 300 trillion won, or around 210 billion US dollars. Now, some of the ministry's key goals include attracting more tourists, nurturing regional tourism, and facilitating active cultural exchanges with other countries. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday touted the Gaza ceasefire deal, saying that it's opened the door to rebuilding. Now, the comments came during a summit of world leaders in Egypt as the last of the Israeli hostages were returned to their families. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us more.
U.S. President Donald Trump attended a major summit of world leaders in Egypt on Monday, where he said the Gaza ceasefire deal has opened the door to rebuilding.
And now the rebuilding begins. The rebuilding is maybe going to be the easiest part. I think we've done a lot of the hardest part because the rest comes together. We all know how to rebuild.
The comments came as Trump arrived for the high-level gathering, which brought together more than 20 heads of state. At the peace summit in Egypt, U.S. President Donald Trump, along with the leaders of Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey, signed a document finalizing a peace plan for Gaza. However, with key details undisclosed and a plan not signed by Israel or Hamas, it remains limited in scope. The ceasefire agreed last week halted Israel's massive offensive on Gaza City, which had killed tens of people daily. Under the terms of the deal, Hamas released the final 20 living Israeli hostages, while Israel freed more than 1,900 Palestinian prisoners. The bodies of 28 deceased hostages were also expected to be returned as part of the deal. However, as only 4 were handed over to the Red Cross on Monday, Israel's defense minister called it a failure to meet commitments of the agreement, adding that it will be responded to accordingly. And as the second phase, including the disarmament of Hamas and withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, has yet to be agreed upon, eyes are on whether Israel and Hamas can reach a comprehensive deal while narrowing their differences and ultimately achieve lasting peace. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
Despite a recent bumpy mood between the U.S. and China over trade issues, Washington is keeping its dialogue open with Beijing. The U.S. Treasury Chief says President Trump's planned meeting with China's Xi Jinping here in Seoul in South Korea signals easing tensions between the two sides. Pyongyang has more.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a meeting between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea is still on track. In an interview with Fox Business on Monday, Bessent said there were substantial communications between the two sides over the weekend, adding that U.S.-China relations have substantially de-escalated. He noted that both sides will hold additional working-level meetings this week on the sidelines of the IMF and World Bank gatherings. His comments come as both countries move to cool tensions that flared after Washington announced a potential 100% tariff on Chinese imports and Beijing tightened controls on rare earth exports.
It was a miscalculation, but we are communicating now. I am confident that we can move forward.
Bessent additionally stated that President Trump has made clear the tariffs will not take effect until November 1st, signaling that the U.S. is leaving room for diplomatic progress. He sharply criticized China's export restrictions, saying they would affect the whole world and that China has pointed a bazooka at the supply chain and industrial base of the entire free world. The Treasury Chief said the U.S. is prepared to assert its sovereignty in a variety of ways, noting that Washington is already in close contact with its allies in Europe, India, and democratic nations across Asia. He expressed optimism that Beijing remains open to talks, but warned that if not, Washington holds significant leverage to respond with equally strong or stronger countermeasures. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics' third quarter earnings exceeded market expectations by 17%. That figure is the highest in 3 years, and analysts expect the positive trend to continue. Our Kim Do-yeon has this report.
South Korea's largest company by market cap, Samsung Electronics, has released preliminary quarterly earnings that have significantly surpassed market forecasts. The company announced on Tuesday its preliminary earnings for the third quarter of 2025, posting an operating profit of 12.1 trillion Korean won or $8.47 billion on sales of 86 trillion won or $60.23 billion. These figures represent a quarter-on-quarter increase of 158.55% for operating profit, while sales saw a jump of 15.33%. Year-on-year, the increase is 31.8% for operating profit and 8.72% for sales. The operating profit exceeded the market consensus of approximately 10 trillion won by more than 17%. The 12.1 trillion won operating profit is the company's highest since the second quarter of 2022. The 86 trillion won in sales marks a record for any quarter, and it's the first time the company's quarterly revenue has surpassed the 80 trillion won threshold. The previous record for sales was 79.1 trillion won, set in the third quarter of 2024. According to an expert, the strong performance is driven by a combination of factors, with the trend likely to continue into next year.
The improved performance is due to three things: strong sales in AI-related memory, a surge in prices for legacy products due to supply shortages, and reduced deficits in the foundry and system LSI divisions. I expect this boom to continue through the fourth quarter.
The better-than-expected performance was reflected in the company's stock price, with shares reaching a new 52-week high of 96,000 won during intraday trading on Tuesday. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And the strong performances of local semiconductors were also clearly evident in South Korea's ICT export figures last month, which turned out to be a record high as well. Our correspondent Panmunjeom has the details.
Despite uncertainties in the global trade environment, South Korea saw an all-time high performance in the ICT sector last month. According to the Ministry of Science and ICT and the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Tuesday, ICT exports for the month totaled $25.43 billion, a 14% increase from the same month last year. This resulted in a trade surplus of $11.65 billion. Outbound shipments of semiconductors, one of the country's main export engines, recorded $16.62 billion in exports. This also marked an all-time high for the second consecutive month. Exports of telecommunications equipment, which rose over 38%, and displays also contributed to this upward trend, driven by strong OLED demand. The strong performance was largely credited to the semiconductor industry thanks to higher memory chip prices amid growing demands for AI servers.
It seems the significant rise in DRAM prices played a role in this upward trend. Given the continuous strength of the semiconductor market itself, we can expect continued strong performance in Q4 as well.
Despite this upward trend, due to the tariff situation, exports to the U.S. decreased, marking it as the only region to do so, while others experienced gains. Shipments to Taiwan recorded the most significant surge, primarily fueled by a substantial rise in semiconductor exports, while other major markets, including China, Vietnam, the European Union, and Japan, also saw increased exports. Meanwhile, imports totaled $13.78 billion, resulting in a positive ICT trade balance, the second highest figure on record. Munjeom, Arirang News.
There has been a recent rise in global streaming platforms investing intensively into K-content, bringing numerous series that feature Korea's top stars in leading roles. However, in contrast, Korea's film industry is struggling to recover to pre-pandemic audience numbers and is seeing far fewer big-budget productions. Lee Eun-jin has more.
The Korean spy romance series Tempest premiered on Disney Plus on September 10th. It tells the story of a female politician and a mysterious special agent as they chase the hidden truth behind a presidential candidate suddenly being shot. The project has drawn attention for its star-studded cast lineup with the likes of Chun Ji-yeon and Kang Dong-won in the leading role, and also for its well-known director and screenwriter.
Above all, I chose this project because I really wanted to work with Kang Dong-won before it was too late.
I chose it because of Chun Ji-yeon.
Last year, 10 of the top 15 Asia-Pacific content titles on Disney Plus were Korean productions, showing the solid global influence of K-content. Based on this, major investments amounting to hundreds of billions of won are being made in Korean productions.
At Disney, we are committed to investing in original productions worldwide and supporting creative communities, especially here in Korea.
After bringing the rise of K-content phenomenon with Squid Game, Netflix continues to roll out projects backed by success-guaranteed production teams. Meanwhile, Korean movie theaters are experiencing the opposite trend, struggling with the competition from streaming services. After the flop of this summer's big-budget film, Omniscient Reader: The Prophecy, hopes for large-scale investments in films have dimmed even further. This year's top 3 Korean box office hits were all cost-effective films with production budgets around 10 billion won. That's approximately $7.5 million. With fewer big productions and an overall decline in the number of films being made, some actors are joking that they've become streaming specialists.
I used to make a living as a film actor, but these days, I feel like I'll starve waiting for a movie role. So I'm transforming into a streaming services actor.
The film The Ugly, released in early September, was an ultra-low-budget film and was completed in just 3 weeks with a crew of 20 people. It tells the story of a man discovering the body of his mother, who he thought had disappeared 40 years ago, and begins to uncover the hidden story behind it. Made for less than 300 million won, roughly $225,000, which is lower than even the average budget for independent films, the director says it still retains the unique appeal of a theatrical release.
I approached this project with questions like, what would the result be if I made a film using a different production model from what I've done before?
Though it's a type of project only a well-renowned director would dare to attempt, it's being praised as a meaningful effort for the future of Korea's struggling film industry as its latest trend turns to more cost-effective films. 이은진, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. U.S. President Donald Trump says he is considering sending Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Trump's remarks follow a weekend phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who urged stronger U.S. support to launch counterattacks and insisted that the Tomahawks would be used only against Russian military targets. Zelensky will meet Trump in Washington on Friday to discuss air defense and long-range capabilities. However, Moscow warned that supplying Tomahawks would trigger a major escalation and further strain U.S.-Russia relations. The missile's 2,500-kilometer range would put Moscow within reach from Ukrainian territory. Trump's stance toward Vladimir Putin has hardened as ceasefire talks stalled, and now he warns Russia not to, quote, test Washington's patience. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov calls the idea, quote, of extreme concern, saying Russia cannot know whether incoming Tomahawks carry nuclear warheads. In Madagascar, weeks of protests and growing army defections have caused President Andry Rajoelina to flee the country. An opposition figure confirmed that officials acknowledged the president left Sunday on a French military plane after elite troops joined demonstrators. In a Facebook address, Rajoelina said he was in a, quote, safe location and vowed not to allow Madagascar to be destroyed, yet refused to resign. France's President Emmanuel Macron urged calm and respect for constitutional order, but declined to confirm French involvement. Protests that began over power and water shortages have become a national revolt over corruption and poverty. According to the UN, at least 22 people have died in the protests, with the Senate now taking interim control and the military asserting power. Madagascar faces its worst instability in a decade. In Mexico, at least 64 people are dead, with another 65 missing after a week of torrential rain triggered flash floods and landslides across 5 states. Officials say rivers overflowed and entire neighborhoods vanished as floodwaters tore through Veracruz, Idalo, and Puebla. More than 100,000 homes are damaged and 80 communities remain cut off. Troops are airlifting food and water to isolated towns still in darkness. President Claudia Sheinbaum says thousands of troops have been deployed to the affected areas. Finally, to the U.S., where California's Governor Gavin Newsom has signed the nation's first law regulating AI chatbots, rejecting the White House calls for a hands-off approach to artificial intelligence. The new law forces chatbot operators to build in critical safety measures for users and allow lawsuits when failures cause harm. Supporters say it closes a deadly gap exposed by recent teen suicides linked to unregulated AI companions. The bill was inspired by the death of a 14-year-old boy who had exchanged suicidal messages with a chatbot modeled on a fantasy series character. Newsom said California, quote, won't stand by while companies continue without limits or accountability. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
It's hard to see the clear autumn sky at the moment. With cloudy skies, 5 to 20 millimeters of rain is expected in eastern parts of Gangwon-do province and the east coast of Gyeongsang-buk-do province by tonight. Other southern regions will receive about 5 millimeters of rain, and raindrops will also fall in the central regions. Today, the daytime temperature was higher than yesterday. It rose to 21 degrees Celsius in Seoul, which is about 3 degrees higher than yesterday, showing the typical autumn conditions at this time of year. In addition, the wind will blow strongly around the coastal areas of Gyeongsang-do provinces. A high wave advisory is also in place around the east coast. Please take extra precautions. Seoul will start off at 16 degrees tomorrow morning, Gwangju at 19 degrees. Highs will go up to 23 to 27 degrees all over the country. Rain that will cover the country tomorrow is expected to continue until Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have at this hour. Well, we'll be back later at 8 p.m. Korea time. Thanks for watching.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea if you signed a contract for a one room. Obviously, you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No, Mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% since rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
Her reputation precedes her. Known for her right-leaning views, Japan's presumptive Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is already making waves abroad. Will her foreign policy stir fresh tensions in a region already fraught with historical and territorial disputes? Stay tuned for Press Perspective today. Welcome to Press Perspective. It's Tuesday, October 14th here in Seoul. I'm Oh Soo-young filling in for Min Sun-hee. Sanae Takaichi won Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party's leadership election earlier this month. She has yet to be confirmed by Parliament as Prime Minister, but the 64-year-old politician's controversial stance on Japan's wartime past and her nationalistic rhetoric are drawing scrutiny, particularly from Seoul and Beijing. For more on what her leadership could mean for regional diplomacy, I'm joined by Camille Ruiz with Radio France International. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm also joined by Fabian Kretschmer with Germany's news agency DPA. Thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, yeah.
Well, my first question goes to you, Fabian. So, Takaichi is being described as an aspiring Margaret Thatcher. Some call her the Japanese Le Pen or a female Shinzo Abe for her nationalistic views. And well, what do we currently know about her political background and her foreign policy?
Yeah, in my opinion, all those comparisons, they are not so far-fetched, especially the Margaret Thatcher one, because she herself claimed that Margaret Thatcher was one of her political role models. So I want to give a small background about her biography, because I found her biography quite interesting. You know, she was a drum player, playing in a heavy metal band during university years. She was driving motorcycles. She worked as a newscaster before entering politics, and that was more than 30 years ago. I would say that Shinzo Abe, the deceased former prime minister, was one of her mentors, and she's kind of following in his footsteps when it comes to economic policy. Abenomics is one hashtag. I mean, that includes very loose monetary policy, fiscal stimulus. I mean, that is on her economic agenda, but otherwise, I mean, she's a woman, obviously, and but she will probably not do much in terms of gender equality. She's rather conservative on that front. I mean, also when it comes to sexual minorities, she's not advancing that, but rather regressing in that regard. In terms of her political stance, I mean, she's definitely very conservative, maybe even nationalist when it comes to foreigner policy, migrants, etc. She's quite a hardliner. And she has a rather revisionist view on history. Maybe we can talk about that later. But foreign policy, and I think that's really important for South Korea, she is quite a security hawk. Pro-US, I mean, she's looking forward to foster ties with the US. She is quite anti-China, or let's say critical towards China, and very interestingly, very supportive of Taiwan. Maybe one detail I should also add, she wants to expand Japanese military. I mean, we know from the history that, you know, the constitution in Japan was basically limited what the military can do and what Japan is allowed to do, and she wants to revise that and basically strengthen the defense capabilities of the Japanese military.
Right, so she's been described as something of a rock star, a metal lady in a way, and not afraid to ruffle some feathers, especially with some of her revisionist views. And she's been aligned with those who they tend to downplay Japan's imperial past and wartime atrocities. Cami, what kind of concerns is this raising in Seoul?
Yes, so as you said, in Korea, Takaichi is known for her past visits to the contentious Yasukuni Shrine Memorial, where Japan's war dead, including convicted war criminals, are commemorated. So every time a politician visits, it's bringing outrage to the public debate here in South Korea. But not only has she visited multiple times the memorial, but she also has repeatedly questioned mainstream accounts of comfort women, you know, and euphemism, for the thousands of women, most of them Korean, who were forced into sexual slavery by Japan's military during World War II. In South Korea, it's a very sensitive historic issue. For years and years, there have been, and still going on, if I'm not wrong, protests in front of the Japanese embassy here in Seoul. So most of the protesters are women, different ages, old or young, and they are asking for a public and sincere apology from the Japanese government and demand compensation. They also want the companies which participate in those war crimes to be punished. So if Takaichi is elected, it would not only probably never happen under her term, but it also can damage the relation between the two countries if she takes a position on the matter as she already did in the past. But I mean, as a prime minister, it would be a prime minister who represents her people. So it would be. It can be even more concerning for Seoul. It would probably be very tricky for President Lee Jae-myung to handle. So one of the key questions is how the president of South Korea is would deal with it. But analysts believe the former security minister's stance may be tempered by the realities of fragile coalition in the region.
Sure, but of course, as you said, the uncertainty looms, and perhaps that extends to China as well, Fabian, where you've been for 5 years, partly why we couldn't have coffee since 2018. But what's the view from Beijing?
Yeah, actually, there are not much official reactions yet. I mean, the foreign ministry, and they have a daily press briefing in Beijing. They did not comment much because she's not confirmed yet as a prime minister. But it's no secret that Beijing is not happy about her election. And there are two main reasons. One is the historical view of Takaishi. I mean, the revisionist mindset, I would say. I mean, it's important to know that Japan did not only commit a lot of war crimes on the Korean peninsula, but of course also in China. If you want to see that, you can go to Nanjing. There's a memorial, like a big museum where, I mean, everything is captured and documented. A big massacre, war crimes like chemical experiments against the local population. I mean, really horrible things. And so if there's no official distancing and apology by a Japanese leader, then of course that angers the Chinese people. But the second thing, and that relates to the present, is her stance towards Taiwan. I mean, that she's basically saying Taiwan should decide, or the Taiwanese should decide about their future, and there should not be any change in the status quo that is done by force. Namely, China should not conquer Taiwan. I mean, she's very outspoken in that regard, and that also angers Beijing, because for Beijing that's an inner Chinese matter. They don't want anyone to comment on Taiwan. But I would say Beijing probably has a let's wait and see approach. Why? Because they give the benefit of the doubt to someone, and we know that from leaders not only in Asia but also in Europe, they're much more hawkish when it comes to China before they're in office, and when they're in office they have to deal with quote-unquote realpolitik. They also have to combine economic interests, and of course China is a big trading partner also for Japan, and that usually leads to the fact that politicians, once they're in power, they tone down their rhetoric quite a bit.
Right, and of course, Fabian mentioned the constitution, which it looks like the presumptive prime minister for now, she's been strongly in favor of revising it, the pacifist parts of the Japanese constitution. So Takaichi is in favor of revising it so that Japan militarizes beyond its self-defense forces. What do you think, Hami, would be the regional reaction to that if it happens?
Yeah, so as Fabian said, there is some historical issues between South Korea and China on one side and Japan on the other. Tokyo still depends on the United States for defense, and there are still military bases on the Japanese territory. But observers says that it's much more for U.S. national interests, particularly towards China, than effective protection for Japanese people. Takaichi even said, I quote, "Unless Japan can defend itself, its fate will always be at the mercy of shallow U.S. opinion." So what Takaichi plans to do if she gets the prime minister position is revise the Article 9 of the Constitution. What is the Article 9? It renounces the right to wage war and stipulates that it will not maintain an army, navy, air force, or any other military force. So Sanae Takaichi suggested Japan procure advanced defense equipment, promote research and development, and increase defense spending. Why? To cope with China military buildup. She also would like to assertive territorial claims and be able, if necessary, to face North Korea nuclear and missile programs. And as for missile programs, missile defense, she called for new legislation that will enable Japan to attack enemy bases to temporarily nullify their functions. But still we have to wait to see if she's elected and if she will actually revise the constitution or and all, yeah.
Right, both of you have actually mentioned, Takaichi having to face up to the geopolitical reality. She may actually harbour these nationalistic beliefs and views, but when she actually becomes prime minister, then she will have to play to realpolitik. And Fabienne, well, maybe we saw this with the Lee Jae-myung government. So before he came to power, there were many concerns about how this whole Tokyo relationship, where that would be headed. But once he came into power, he committed to continuing the reciprocal visits of leaders between Seoul and Tokyo, and also committed to respecting past historical agreements despite having been forged by previous conservative administrations. So what most experts, although some experts worry that all of this might fall through under Takaichi, most diplomats that I've spoken to, they say that she's likely to show a policy of continuity. But I would like to hear what you think of this. Do you think she might surprise us in that respect?
Well, it's a tough question because I'm not really so much of an expert on Japanese politicians, but I would assume so that actually there will be a continuation. Why? I mean, you already mentioned that the geopolitical reality has changed. I give you several examples. I mean, North Korea is basically a rising threat. I mean, they are really emboldened now with their military cooperation with Russia. They expanded military technology, their nuclear program, etc. So this is a threat for both Japan and South Korea. We have China, which is a rising economic competitor and also a systemic challenge, I would say. I mean, I think China is disrupting the international order to some degree. Then you have Trump in the White House. I mean, Trump has not proven to be a particularly reliable security partner. I mean, there are so many changes and disruptions that basically the countries here in the region who are both liberal democracies, who share actually several values, they should maybe unite to a certain degree. I'm talking about South Korea and Japan. And, when this revival of friendship was started by former South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, there was somewhat controversial here among South Koreans because, of course, we know that, there are historical wounds which have not healed. But there's also a certain pragmatism that is needed. And when Lee Jae-myung is expanding this friendship or this revival of bilateral relations, then, it's also a recognition of those realities. I would say that the upcoming Japanese Prime Minister would be smart to keep good relationships with South Korea. Otherwise, Japan would be quite isolated here in the region. And I think she would also be very smart to tone down her rhetoric when it comes to previous war crimes of Japan. I think she should rather apologize and distance herself from the dark side of the Japanese history, or at least, try to avoid that topic.
Right, so as you mentioned, I mean, there's a whole list of reasons why Seoul and Tokyo should cooperate. So I suppose there's no real reason to trigger any disputes. And well, especially with public sentiment, Fabienne, having changed quite noticeably in recent years among the South Korean public, they tend to view Japanese much more favorably than they have, let's say, even 3-4 years ago. I mean, have you noticed that in everyday life here as a correspondent?
There's also a tough question. I would say there are some signs that I've noticed, but overall, I mean, Koreans, in my opinion, always had a very ambivalent view on Japan. There was, of course, some sentiments against Japan based on historical wounds, but at the same time there was also an admiration. For example, Japan has always been a very one of the most popular, if not the most popular from time to time, travel destination. And Koreans who traveled to Tokyo, they also spoke of, I mean, high tones, saying that things work fine there, and actually the Japanese people that I met, they are polite, and so actually the view was also quite positive in some way. Politically, that's another story. Especially among the left, you had a lot of resentments against Japan. Now, what happened is, first, time has passed, so the historical wounds maybe not, I mean, they still play a huge role. We should not underestimate that, but maybe not as much as, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. And what has also changed is the geopolitical reality, and I think also people notice that. I mean, what has actually become much more of a threat in terms of perception is China. I mean, you go to political rallies, you look at the political banners, like the posters that you can see in Seoul, for example, they are quite critical towards China. And you can say that maybe Japan is not so much the scapegoat anymore, but I think China much more. And of course, I mean, scapegoat is maybe the wrong term, but you can just say that the negative views are more directed towards Beijing now, not so much against Tokyo.
Right, so perhaps in recognition of that, the current government has really made an effort to compartmentalize these things, so working on the future relationship while working separately on historical issues. And Cami, I have the same question to you. As a correspondent here, have you noticed this change that we've seen in the polls about Korean public sentiment towards Japan?
Well, to be honest, I'm here now for about 1 year, so I cannot tell how it was in the past, but only what I can feel now. So first of all, I want to emphasize that the fact that 12 million people traveled between the two countries last year. A lot of young people, a lot of Korean I know, traveled to Japan. So I think it helps a lot, you know, to actually go and see the country, eat the food, admire landscapes, talk to Japanese people. Obviously, there is a lot of exchanges, Korean students in Japan, Japanese students in Korea. They are consuming each other cultural products. Like I have many friends who are watching anime, who are reading manga. I think that understanding each other is a very important move towards peaceful relationship. And time is probably helping too, as Fabian said. But still, I have friends very interested in politics, in democracy, who are trying to boycott Japanese products, who are very sensitive to words like sushi, for example, insisting on using the Korean word tolbap. But it's still is not representative of the majority of the youth in Korea. Of course, they acknowledge the difference between Japanese people and Japanese government, and that they are more angry, disappointed against officials who are like considering that they never apologize for their war crimes, and that they should not only do it, but publicly doing apologizes and with sincerity. And there are some factors like age or gender which can influence political opinion. So, of course, public sentiment towards Japanese people depends on every individual. But it seems, at least, as Fabian said again, that at least politicians stop using it to manipulate opinion, as it is currently the case with anti-Chinese hateful comments from a lot of observers' point of view.
Right, and perhaps that's a testament to the kind of democracy the country might be. You know, the public sentiment is clearly, you know, warming to the Japanese. In fact, more than warming. 12 million, that's a sizable fraction of the Korean population, you know, traveling to Japan. And really, as you said, separating political issues, historical issues, and building friendships. So this being the 60th year of the Korea-Japan relationship of normalizing ties, yes, we're seeing progress there. And Fabian, well, there are, of course, some historical triggers that, you know, pull at the heartstrings of Koreans, and that's Japanese politicians' trip to the very controversial shrine for World War II Class A criminals in Japan. And apparently Takaishi is reportedly considering skipping a visit this autumn. So do you think that is a good start to her regional diplomacy?
I would say that it would be a good start, because it's not confirmed yet. I think she is still making up her mind. But yeah, it would be smart for her not to do so, not visit that shrine. I give you an analogy. Imagine a German leader, like political leader, would visit like a graveyard where like convicted war criminals from the Second World War from Nazi Germany are honored. I mean, that's unimaginable and not acceptable. I mean, I'm sure that people in France would be outraged by that. And so I think, I hope she doesn't visit that shrine. And so far, I think I would be happy if Japan and South Korea would get along better. Both societies could learn a lot from each other. There's also much more win-win potential economically and politically. I think they also share a lot in common. And those historical triggers, they always stand in the way. And I see, I must say clearly, the Japanese politicians in responsibility. They should not visit that shrine. I mean, I think that is not too much to ask for. Also, as a South Korean, I mean, sorry, I'm not South Korean, but for South Korean public, I think it would be not too much to ask for Japanese politicians not to visit that shrine. And I think that is a minimum that you should expect, and I hope she will not do so.
Right, of course, World War II, it hasn't even been a century yet since it occurred, right? So the scars are still there, quite visible. And, well, Kami, well, lastly, how are European nations looking at Takaichi's impending premiership, if it happens, of course?
Yeah. First of all, several British and French media outlets portrayed her and her political views about conservatism, about being the protégé of Shinzo Abe, about economy, and a lot of them saw her victory as certain. But as she was elected new leader of the LDP, but as you know, the Komeï party ended its cooperation with the LDP 4 days ago. Because the LDP didn't fully accept better management of political finances according to the Komeï party. So it threatens her appointment as prime minister and also paved the way for the opposition. Now, European media outlets don't hesitate to use strong headlines, displaying it as a political crisis. Other candidates seem not really popular enough to be featured in most newspapers. But so, as I said earlier, they are focusing on her public statements about immigration, for instance. We know that Japan, like South Korea, has a very low birth rate compared to other nations, and they are struggling to hire young workers for shops, construction sites, or factories. That's why some French media and some experts assert that despite her words about immigrants being rude, she probably couldn't do anything about it. And on feminism, she doesn't want women to choose between their surname or their husband's surnames. It would be against Japanese traditions, she said, but it's very interesting from an European point of view because in Spain, France, Germany also, I think it's legal and it's a fundamental right, a political victory for feminists. It's seen as a step forward for gender equality, and even if it may be seen as just an administrative detail, it's part of women's identity and background. So yes, just to say that European media have been very interested in this topic, but not really in a positive way, I would say.
Well, as ever in this industry, we'll have to wait and see, because before anything else, she needs to take office, which of course requires parliamentary approval. And because the junior partner of her ruling Liberal Democratic Party has decided to leave the coalition, we don't know how that's going to affect her potential premiership yet. Well, thank you very much, Camille Ruiz from Radio France International and Fabien Kretschmer from DPA. Thank you very much. That's where we'll wrap up this edition of Press Perspective. Do join us at the same time tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.